Well, I thank you. And today, thank you, Donna. Thank you for the blessing that you are, the love that you are. And thank you, Karen, for the blessing and the love that you are. And how appropriate. Today's lesson is the lesson of detachment or non-attachment. So I always have the opportunity to flow with the impermanence of life. And impermanence is expressing through the internet this morning. So we had a solid connection for 3 hours and then it just dropped off. So I am going to share my screens, give it a go, and then I surrender from this place of allowing. And so let's see.
I'd like to also shout out to Vicki, she and I have been texting and speaking back and forth.
Thanks.
So I'd like to thank her too.
Thank you. And all those who've checked in with me, even my self-services body. So for those who gave the idea of joining in from the phone, that was spotty as well. All right, so how is everybody? I'm just going to advance these real quick to after our meditation. So as I breathe into the fullness of this moment with you, I have this video that I would like to share with you about non-attachment. It is an excerpt of a fuller video, and the excerpt that I am sharing with you is narrated by Alan Watts. And so know that we're only getting a snippet of it. So when Alan Watts shares a quote from Yogananda, it is when he talks about sexual pleasures, it's referring to all the pleasures of this world. And when we speak of pleasure, it is pleasure in the sense from Buddhists looking at it from the joy and the happiness of our beingness. And when you hear the word sin, I'm just reminding you that sin means living from a consciousness that is unripe, an unawakened consciousness. And so without further ado, I share this video with you. It's very powerful.
To be detached from the world, in the sense that Buddhists and Taoists and Hindus will often talk about detachment, does not mean to be non-participative. You can have a sexual life very rich and very full, and yet all the time be detached. By that I don't mean that you just go through it mechanically and have your thoughts elsewhere. I mean a complete participation, but still detached. And the difference of the two attitudes is this. On the one hand, there is a way of being so anxious about physical pleasure, so afraid that you won't make it, that you grab it too hard, that you just have to have that thing. And if you do that, you destroy it completely. And therefore, after every attempt to get it, you feel disappointed. You feel empty, you feel something was lost. And therefore you want it again. You have to keep repeating, because you never really got there. And it's this that is the hang-up. This is what is meant by attachment to this world, in an evil sense. But on the other hand, Pleasure in its fullness cannot be experienced when one is grasping it. I knew a little girl to whom someone gave a bunny rabbit. She was so delighted with the bunny rabbit and so afraid of losing it that taking it home in the car, she squeezed it to death with love. And lots of parents do that to their children, and lots of spouses do it to each other. They hold on too hard, and so take the life out of this transient, beautifully fragile thing that life is. To have it, to have life, and to have its pleasure, you must at the same time let go of it. And then you can feel perfectly free to have that pleasure in the most gutsy, rollicking, earthy, lip-licking way. One's whole being taken over by a kind of undulative, convulsive ripple, which is like the very pulse of life itself. This can happen only if you let go.
And like the little girl, many of us have had the experience of holding on so tightly to the people we love, holding on so tightly that we squeeze the very joy and happiness and life out of our relationships. And when we are holding on so tight, so attached, we believe that in the name of love, that it is okay to be possessive. We kind of go asleep and come from that place of deep hurt within us. And in the name of love, not only do we become possessive, but we become controlling, demanding, and unsolicited advice givers. Boy, do we not sometimes think we have the answers for all of our beloveds, not just our beloveds, but anybody who would listen, because we're going to just set it straight because our advice is so important and is the only advice that there is. And sometimes we play that role of the fixer, thinking that we know best. And not only do we become attached and hold so tightly to the ones we love, the people in our lives, but we've also been domesticated, accustomed to becoming attached to our material possessions, self-limiting beliefs we hold about ourselves, that we hold about other people, groups of people, cultures, so on and so on. And we go to those behaviors that are quick fixes only to give us that temporarily thrill of excitement and pleasure, but to only discover later on that they cause more pain and suffering in our lives. And we are attached to our past. We relive it over and over again. And sometimes it is hard to let it go. And we also would rather many times to stick with the known in our lives, even when the known way of living and being is unfulfilling. And the divine urge to be more, grow, open, and express more is ignored because, after all, this is what I know, this is what's comfortable, and I think it's safe. So what do we do? How do we live in this world as the master teacher Jesus taught us, but not be of this world. Do not deny that everything in this world is of God, the unlimited, invisible substance of life. If everything is of God, then everything that is in expression is of God. So how do we glean those joys and pleasures and let go at the same time? And I love the quote by Krishnamurti. So how do we let go of life in order to have it and its pleasures in the most gutsy, rollicking, earthly, lip-smacking way? Do you say yes to that? Do you say yes to that? I love it. I say yes to that. But it is in a way when we are centered in that non-attachment, living from the essence of our being, that is the way. When we are living there, that our whole being is taken over by an undulated, ecstatic ripple, which is the pulse of life itself. That undulating, ecstatic ripple, which is the pulse of life itself, is what we experience when we are living from the deep chambers of our souls, of our hearts, when we are loving for the sake of loving with no strings attached. It is not easy. And so, how do we love, enjoy, have pleasure, and let go? Well, Deepak Chopra invites us into the practice of the law of detachment, which is also referred to by many spiritual teachers as the law of non-detachment. So what does this law say? Well, in order to experience that ecstatic life ripple that we spoke to, and that many of us say yes to, in order to experience true pleasure, happiness, and the realization of the desires of our heart, we are asked to do two things. To animate our desires with our thoughts, words, and behaviors. We talked about the power of imagination, but we are to animate them from the highest place in consciousness that we are capable of expressing moment to moment. And then as we animate it, as we have that clear focus, energizing the desire of our heart's intention, we are at the same time asked to let go and to practice detachment. So I want to look at that word detachment and explore with you why many teachers, even within the Buddhist circles, use the word of non-detachment. We even discussed this the other night in the Living Originally class. For the word detachment seems to be misused, misunderstood. And when we hear that word, sometimes it's synonymous with us showing up in an aloof way, where how we cope with things is, I'm not going to allow that to disturb me. I'm not going to give my power over it, but I do it by avoiding people and situations. Or I'm not interested in that anymore. Well, that may be true, but is it a letting go that comes from the depths of wanting the best for me and another? Or is it the coping mechanism that I learned where I somehow tune out, numb myself out? And then from that place, I am kind of devoid of not just passion, but all of my feelings. You see, one of the things, that happens when we live in the duality consciousness, sometimes we misunderstand the spiritual path as, I'm not a body and I deny the body. I don't give any attention to the body. Well, we cannot treat things of this world, including our body, as an idol. But we were given feelings, the power to create. we are wired to have, as Emily Cady said, the desires of the divine tapping at our hearts. And what happens, it gets filtered through from a consciousness when we are asleep. And we think that these things are the source of joy instead of just reveling in, wow, it is a sacred expression of the Most High. We then become, instead seeing that as the symbol of what is bringing us the joy. So how do we live with that passion and joy and not bypass anything of this world, including our human experience? It's by knowing what non-attachment is really about. So non-attachment is living right here, right now, in this present moment, being aware, awake, and alive, and choosing breath by breath from the highest place of awareness. And that moment by moment living is true freedom. And it is also allowing life to express itself through and as us, unfettered and unfiltered by our personalities and our past conditionings. And in that allowing, we allow and accept what is right here before us. And we allow it to leave instead of clinging on. And sometimes that can bring us peace because, when we're in the joy of experiencing something we like, we don't want to let it go. But there's also freedom in knowing that even the painful situations, if we just allow it and breathe into it and not resist, there is the truth that nothing lasts and that this too shall pass. And living with non-attachment, this one just makes my heart sing. It is, I think, beautiful. It is offering ourselves as the gift to the world and expecting nothing in return. Let's take a moment. Let's just look at that one more time. Offering myself as the gift to the world and expecting nothing to return. Not only did the Buddhist teachers, Taoists, and Hindus teach non-attachment, being present to what is, walking between the worlds, but the master teacher, Jesus, spoke of it. And Jesus was a practicing Essene Jew. He and the Essenes were a group of people who lived by the mystical law rather than by the letter of the law. So in Matthew, here we see, do not store up yourself treasures on earth, where the moths and rust destroy it, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. And when we speak of treasures, we mean the joy of our being, the pleasures of our being that can only emanate from a consciousness of heaven. It is not a place, heaven. It is when we are living from our highest expression of our own divinity. And not only do we hear the teaching or see reflected here in Matthew 6:19 through 21, not only do we see Jesus speak of the law of non-attachment, but we also see the Buddhist teaching of what is called impermanence, right? Things of this earth will rust and leave and break away, but the truth and the essence of who we are and the joy of our being which transcends the physical world, is our spirit, is our essence, and that can never be taken away. And so sometimes when we think about impermanence, surrendering, things not lasting, when it comes to our loved ones, we experience grief and sadness and loss. But there's also beauty in letting go, which is expressed here so profoundly by Buddhist teacher Brian Thompson, as he states that all things grow and change and wither and fade. All things become strong and then they become weak. Not just physical things, but so too with intangibles, such as our forms of awareness, including our thoughts, ideas, feelings, concepts, and states of mind, mental energies, and all of our relationships too. All things are impermanent, and yet we still try to base our happiness onto things staying exactly the same or remaining as they currently are. Without impermanence, all of life would be impossible. A seed could not grow into a fruit, nor would forever remain, for it will remain forever a seed. A child could not become an adult. An idea could not become a plan. Spring would never arrive because winter will never leave. And so we see the beauty of the cycles of life, the beauty of things ending and going through the process of grieving, of letting go, but doing it in a way where we don't close down our hearts and shut ourselves off, but we say yes to loving from a more fuller way of understanding and expressing the beauty of our light. And so this is not easy, this living without attachment, living from our highest place of expression, because we have been so domesticated to believe that it is these objects and it is certain people that are the joy. So how do we live and experience that ecstatic joy of being and at the same time let go? Well, it is living with radical awareness, being aware moment to moment where we may have attachments, and then being willing to choose again. And so here are 4 common attachments that the Buddha taught. Attachments to our material things and our sense pleasures. So we are to enjoy the things of this world, the things that we can taste and savor, the things that we can hear, that we can see, that we can touch and smell, yet not make them our idols. To enjoy them in the moment, and yet know the joy is I am giving reverence to this gift that has been given, and I am willing to let it go, knowing that the joy comes from within and not from the objects itself. Another form of attachment commonly practices, we are attached to our opinions and views. Boy, more than ever do we see that being played out in such polarization that is expressing. So does this mean we never share our view or opinion? No, it asks us to go within, and before we share something, we ask ourselves, from what place in consciousness is this opinion and view of mine being shaped, informed? Is it being informed from the wisdom that is within? And if you find yourself reacting having to share your point of view to prove something, when you find yourself being defensive, then you can know that it is coming from an unripe consciousness and not from your highest. Remember the teachings that we did earlier this year in compassionate communication, in right speech. Is it true? Is it kind? And is my opinion necessary in this moment? And it also asks me to be open. And if I am holding on so tightly to the way things are and the way things I think they should be, I can never be open to other ideas and other possibilities. You know, I often hear people say, you know, I have a good sense, I'm really good in reading people. Well, yes, I honor our intuitive gifts, but when we say we think we know the motive of another, choose again, because only the individual themselves can know from what place in consciousness they are coming from. We see this playing out in the world, where someone will say, oh, you're wearing the mask because you're fearful, where someone says, no, from my heart, I do this from a place of love. None of us get to determine what is most alive in someone's heart, mind, and soul. And so here we are asked to surrender our opinions and views. We are also attached to traditions, rituals, and rules. I love traditional experiences and ceremonies that we've had at Unity by the Shore, whether it's the burning bowl, and I love attending a wedding. I love the ritual of our Christmas Eve dinner of the 7 fishes, but I also am mindful that although these symbols and customs are special, it is who I am being in that moment that allows me to experience the joy. It is not the symbols itself. You know, I've often spoke of, you know, when, you know, I've called us higher in our community, in our sanctuary. It is wonderful to decorate and adorn our sanctuary with symbols. But if we feel that without them, then we're miserable, then it's who we are being in any moment speaks louder than any symbols. How we're getting ready to celebrate my nephew's wedding that has been postponed 2 times because of the pandemic, and it's being held outside. They had a private ceremony, but they're having some family together this next coming weekend. And I've often heard people have I wonder if it's going to be a good wedding. I want, you know, and it's determined by what's going to be served at the cocktail hour, the dinner, if they're going to like the music, so on and so on. Well, how about thinking about who am I willing to be during this wedding? And can I savor and relish the relationships and the joy and the sanctity of what is happening if I don't like the food? Think about it, right? And then we look at the attachment of selfhood, me and mine, me, mine. So we are each unique expressions of the divine. Each one of us have a holy body temple. So how do we love it with reverence, but also know that it is not our sole identity, and that the titles that we have, the jobs that we have, the money that we have, sorry, my light bulb went out, impermanence. Anyway, the title that I have, the money that I have, all of this, right, is not, I get to enjoy it, but it is not the truth of who I am. And how do I, moment by moment, like I shared before, offer my gifts, the unique ones that I am blessed to have? How do I offer them without having any strings attached? or expecting anything in return. And so, my friends, living and loving from the highest place of our being, living with non-attachment, although may sound simple in theory and in spiritual practice, but each one of us knows that it is not easy. And yet deep within us, each one of us, deep within the spiritual chambers of our hearts and our souls, we know the truth. We know the truth that true joy, true love comes from that place of surrendering, of loving for the sake of loving. And although we may falter and have difficulty with it and find ourselves clinging to certain things in our lives, I've also have had the privilege and the pleasure and the awestruckness of watching so many of you practice non-attachment. I've watched countless people surrender, give up their addictions to a substance instead of holding on to it and allowing themselves to implode. I've watched individuals be the presence of kindness and compassion to those who have a hard time showing up other than their suffering, but nevertheless, they are there sharing that love with no strings attached. I've watched countless individuals euthanize out of love their beloved four-legged family members instead of selfishly hanging on, knowing that it was the kindest and loving, most best thing they could do in that moment. And I've seen the difference of people coming to our community and sharing their gifts from a marketing sense, sharing their resources to gain clientele. And then I've seen people share selflessly for the sake of giving. And the beauty you experience in their presence is like no other. And I've also seen people surrender their loved ones when they felt it was time to leave, either from a relationship or to leave this earthly plane, when they wanted them to stay and they wanted to hold on, but nevertheless, in that place of loving for the sake of loving, they have let go. And I close by sharing something that I have permission to. Was really struck by this a couple days ago when I was speaking and praying with Rosette Brooks. And she said to me, my prayer desire is for me to live in this physical world, and I want to return to my home. But Angela, I also surrender, for I realize that it may be my soul's, maybe time. I might be being called home, and if that's for my highest, I surrender to that. And so our prayer was affirming returning home in whatever form that should take in this moment. And there was just such profound beauty and grace. And I know Ann Hopkins, who is her chaplain, has shared her experience of beauty of being in this moment of non-attachment with Rosette. And so, my dear ones, I call you into being that highest expression, living the desires of your heart, yet letting them go and living from that place of non-attachment. Namaste. Blessings of love and reverence to you all.